It was the kind of October night that feels colder than it should, when the wind sounds like it's whispering names through the trees, and the moon hides behind clouds as if it's afraid to look. Daniel Moore, a night shift nurse with more ghosts in his past than he'd ever admit, was driving home along an empty stretch of highway when he saw her. A girl, maybe 16, standing barefoot in the middle of the road, her white dress torn and soaked from the rain. He slammed the brakes, heart pounding, headlights cutting through the mist. But when he looked again, she was gone. All that remained was a single bloody note on his windshield that read, "Help me. He's still out here." Daniel thought it was a prank until he heard footsteps in the woods, footsteps that didn't sound human. The October wind was sharper than usual that night, slicing through Daniel Moore's jacket as he gripped the steering wheel. The small town of Hollow Creek lay silent under a thick blanket of fog, its streets deserted, the lamplights flickering like dying stars. He had just finished a grueling double shift at the hospital, a night that had seen blood, screams, and sorrow, and all he wanted was to reach his small apartment, pour a cup of coffee, and let the warmth chase away the chill crawling down his spine. His truck's headlights carved twin beams through the mist, illuminating the road ahead, wet with scattered leaves that skittered across the asphalt. Daniel's eyes, weary but alert, scanned the empty horizon. The soft hum of the engine and the distant creak of the radio were the only companions on this lonely stretch. A late-night talk show host droned on about true Halloween horror stories, tales of spirits and restless souls, and Daniel let a bitter laugh escape. Nothing real ever happens out here, he thought. But then, something moved. At first, it was just a flicker in the corner of his eye. Then he saw her, a girl standing barefoot in the middle of the road. Her dress was white, torn at the edges, clinging to her small frame as rain misted the night air. She didn't flinch at the sudden glare of his headlights. She didn't even seem to breathe. Daniel slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded slightly on the wet leaves, and his heart leapt into his throat. He could see her clearly now. Long, dark hair matted and damp, pale skin almost glowing in the dim light, eyes wide and unblinking. She raised one trembling hand, pointing toward the woods on the right, but didn't step aside. "What the hell?" Daniel muttered, swallowing hard. The rational part of him screamed to drive off, to ignore what he assumed was some prank or hallucination. But another part, the part that had seen real suffering in the emergency room, tugged at him. He had to help. He reached for the door handle and stepped into the cold night. The wind bit his cheeks, carrying with it the faint scent of wet leaves and decay. He called out softly, "Hey! Are you okay? Do you need help?" His voice echoed off the trees, swallowed by the fog. The girl didn't answer. She just stared at him, pointing insistently toward the dark tree line. Daniel took another step forward, hesitant, when he noticed a glint of something on the asphalt. His eyes widened. A note soaked with blood lay flat on the road in front of him. He picked it up, hands trembling. "Help me. He's still out here." Daniel's breath caught. His pulse thundered in his ears. This isn't a joke. This isn't real, is it? He looked up, expecting to see the girl still standing there. But she had vanished. The empty road stretched ahead, silent and indifferent. Only the rustling leaves betrayed that he was not entirely alone. A shiver ran down his spine as he realized the fog seemed thicker now, pressing against the truck, pressing against him. A sudden movement in the woods, a shadow flickering between the trees, made him step back. His mind raced, part rational, part primal instinct screaming danger. He fumbled for his phone, but there was no signal. The road behind him was dark and empty. Somewhere deep in the fog, the whisper of movement echoed. Soft footsteps, too deliberate to be wind. Daniel felt the weight of a choice pressing down on him. Turn back and drive away, leaving the mystery unsolved, or step toward the forest and face whatever waited in the darkness. The note in his hand felt heavy, almost warm, pulsing with urgency. He knew what he had to do. With a deep breath, Daniel moved toward the tree line, flashlight in hand, heart hammering in his chest. The girl's silent plea, the ominous note, the rustling in the tree, it all beckoned him forward. This night, he realized, would not be like any other. Something alive or something dead was waiting for him in the cold October night. Daniel's hands were clammy, and his heart pounded like a drum as he stepped off the asphalt and into the shadowy edge of the forest. The fog wrapped around him like a living thing, curling between the trees, carrying with it the cold, damp scent of fallen leaves and something fouler he couldn't quite identify. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to abandon the note, to forget the girl and the warning. But a nurse's oath to help those in need anchored him in place. Someone, or something, needed him. The trail was barely visible, a narrow dirt path tangled with roots and scattered branches. His flashlight carved feeble swaths of light through the darkness, illuminating glimpses of the forest floor. Twisted trees loomed overhead, their gnarled limbs scratching the night sky, casting long, jagged shadows that shifted with the wind. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped, though the forest seemed otherwise silent, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. After a few minutes of careful steps, Daniel stumbled into a small clearing. There, half hidden by overgrown vines and moss, stood a cabin, its structure bowed and broken, almost as if it had been swallowed by the forest itself. The windows were shattered, the roof sagging under decades of neglect, and the door hung loose, creaking slightly with the occasional breeze. The sight made Daniel's stomach twist. Who would come here? Why would anyone live in this abandoned place? Despite the growing fear gnawing at him, he felt compelled to investigate. He stepped closer, boots crunching on leaves and twigs, and paused at the threshold. The air that seeped from the cabin smelled of decay and damp wood, mingled with an undertone of something far more sinister, the faint metallic tang of blood. Inside, the cabin was frozen in time. Dust blanketed everything, thick and suffocating. A layer of grime on the floor bore footprints that seemed both recent and impossibly small. Old furniture sagged under the weight of years, and on the walls, Daniel noticed faded children's drawings pinned haphazardly. Stick figures with crooked smiles, houses under jagged suns, and families rendered in crude crayon. But all somehow wrong. One of the drawings caught his eye immediately, a young girl standing beside a tall man. His face was smudged, darkened, and impossible to read, but the figure radiated menace. Scrawled beneath it almost illegibly, "Lydia and Daddy." A shiver ran down Daniel's spine. The girl from the road, the girl in the note, suddenly felt closer than ever, tethered to this cabin like a spirit trapped in a cage. He moved cautiously toward a trap door tucked into the corner. The wood was brittle under his hand, yet it gave way with a soft groan. A wave of putrid air rolled out from the darkness below, suffocating in its stench of mold, rot, and something Daniel couldn't name. He descended slowly, every step measured and careful. His flashlight flickered, and for a moment it seemed like shadows moved just beyond the beam. At the bottom, the floor opened into a small cellar, walls blackened with damp and soot. There, at the center, was a makeshift shrine, melted candles sticking into the dirt, arranged bones forming crude circles, and a small wooden box decorated with symbols that made his skin crawl. On the wall, a framed photograph leaned against the rock and cracked, faded, but unmistakable. The girl in the photo was the same one who had appeared on the road, pale skin, dark hair, eyes wide with fear. And beneath her image, carved into the frame, Lydia, 1998. Daniel's knees buckled slightly. His voice barely a whisper, he muttered, This can't be real," but it was. Every instinct in his body screamed it. He was standing in a place that had held a child's terror for over 20 years. A place where the girl's spirit, or something like her, had been waiting for someone to find her. And deep inside he realized, the note hadn't been a warning. It had been a plea. Something was very wrong in these woods. Something still alive. Something still watching. Daniel swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and stepped further into the cellar, flashlight shaking in his hand. The darkness seemed to swallow him whole, and every shadow flickering against the walls whispered the same message. He's still out here. Daniel's breath came in short, uneven gasps as he adjusted his flashlight. The cellar felt alive, not with warmth but with some lurking presence that seemed to press against his chest, squeezing until each inhale burned. Shadows stretched across the walls like reaching hands, flickering with the movement of his own shaking light. Every creak of timber, every whisper of the wind outside, sounded magnified in the silence of the cabin. He thought he saw movement in the corner, a fleeting shape that vanished before his eyes could focus. A chill ran down his spine. It's just the shadows, just my imagination, he tried to convince himself. But then his phone vibrated. Daniel fumbled for it in his pocket. The screen lit up, though there was no signal, no service. A single message appeared, its text icy and simple. "You shouldn't be here, Daniel." His hand froze. "No one knows I'm here. How could this be?" The words seemed to pulse, glowing faintly in the dim light, sending a shiver down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. And then he heard it. A whisper. Soft, almost tender, but trembling with fear. "He took us." "He's still here." Daniel spun around, swinging his flashlight wildly. The beam landed on walls, shadows, the floor, and nothing. But the voice persisted, faint and quivering, echoing around him. It wasn't coming from one spot. It was everywhere, and yet it felt personal. It called him by name. The temperature dropped sharply, his breath turning into fog in front of him. He felt the faint brush of something against his arm, cold and fleeting, like a finger slipping past skin. A sob, soft and pitiful, echoed from the far corner of the cellar. Daniel swallowed hard. "I can't leave her here. I can't leave them here." Every ounce of his exhaustion, every thought of fear was overpowered by a surge of responsibility. He had to help. Suddenly the flashlight flickered violently. In each moment of light, Daniel thought he saw figures. Shadows of children, pale and trembling, their eyes wide, their mouths open in silent screams. In the next flicker, they were gone. Then he saw it. Movement outside the small grated window near the ceiling. The silhouette of a man, tall and misshapen, watching him. A flash of lightning illuminated a face twisted in darkness, hollow eyes reflecting nothing human. Daniel's instincts screamed danger. He bolted for the trapdoor, tripping over debris as something skittered behind him, the faintest brush against his heels. His flashlight tumbled, illuminating the room in sporadic bursts, revealing broken toys, scattered bones, and the remnants of what seemed to have been rituals performed long ago. As he reached the hatch, the whispers grew louder, overlapping, chaotic, a cacophony of fear. "Help! Save us, don't leave. He's here." Daniel yanked the trapdoor open and scrambled up the steps, the weight of the darkness pressing against him. He slammed it shut behind him, panting, heart hammering. The forest outside was still eerily so, as if it had been holding its breath the entire time. He stumbled toward his truck, adrenaline fueling his legs, but froze when he reached it. The door was open, soaking in the mist. Small, bloody handprints smeared across the seat and windshield, child-sized. Another note lay folded neatly on the dashboard. Daniel picked it up with shaking hands. "You can't leave until he's gone." His stomach churned. He glanced back toward the woods, toward the cabin. Something waited there, something alive, something angry. Every instinct told him to run, but every instinct also told him that running would abandon them. Daniel's jaw tightened. He had no choice. The girl, the children, the voices in the shadows, they needed him. The malevolent presence lurking just beyond the trees wouldn't let him leave. With a deep, shuddering breath, he turned back to the forest, flashlight raised, and began walking toward the darkness again, the whispers of the trapped souls guiding him deeper. The night was cold, the fog thick, and the presence that had haunted this place for decades was awake, watching, waiting. Tonight, Daniel realized, the forest was alive, and it would not forgive anyone who faltered. Daniel's chest heaved as he stumbled back into the forest, fog swirling around him like a living, cold entity. The note's words, "You can't leave until he's gone," replayed in his mind, a relentless mantra. His hands shook, gripping the flashlight and the small medkit from his truck. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to escape, to forget what he'd seen. But he couldn't, not now. Not after hearing Lydia's whispers, not after seeing the terrified shadows in the cabin. The forest seemed to close in around him as he retraced his steps toward the cabin. Each tree loomed larger, twisted and skeletal, their branches clawing at the sky as if warning him to stay away. The wind moaned through the leaves, carrying faint whispers, hundreds of voices overlapping, crying, pleading. "He's here. He's still here. Save us." When Daniel reached the clearing, the cabin was alive in a way it hadn't been before. Flames from the broken fireplace flickered in the darkness, lighting up the interior. Though he could see no one had lit them, shadows danced against the walls, shifting unnaturally. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and decay. And then he saw him. The man from the shadows, the one whose silhouette had haunted him, was standing at the center of the room. He was tall, unnaturally thin, wearing a tattered hunting jacket. His face was obscured, eyes hollow and black as tar. A low guttural voice emerged from his chest. "She was mine to save, not yours." Daniel's fingers clenched around the flashlight. He could feel the malevolence radiating from the figure, a force that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. This wasn't human. Not anymore. It was something twisted, something that had fed on fear on the souls of the lost children who had wandered into the forest decades ago. "Let them go," Daniel shouted, adrenaline coursing through his veins. "You don't get to keep them." The figure moved with unnatural speed, lunging at Daniel. He dodged, rolling over the uneven floorboards as the flashlight tumbled to the ground, casting flickering light that made the shadows writhe like living creatures. The figure's hands reached for him, cold and sharp, grasping at his jacket like claws. Daniel's eyes fell on the spilled gas can in the corner. His pulse quickened as understanding struck. He had one chance to end this nightmare. He grabbed the lighter from his pocket and in a heartbeat ignited the gasoline. Flames roared to life, engulfing the cabin in a sudden furious blaze. The man screamed, not in pain but in rage. Shadows of children's faces appeared in the flames, their cries mixing with the roar of the fire. Daniel stumbled backward, coughing, smoke filling his lungs, but he kept his eyes on the figure. He raised a hand and shouted, "Run, Lydia, run!" The girl bore her spirit and appeared in a pale glow, her hand reaching toward him. She smiled briefly, a mixture of relief and gratitude before slipping through the shadows. Behind her, dozens of pale spectral figures moved as one, heading toward the light of the flames, leaving the dark figure behind. The man's scream echoed, blending with the children's fading voices, until there was only silence, broken by the crackling fire. Daniel, coughing and shaking, staggered out of the cabin just as the roof collapsed in a cascade of timber and flame. Outside, the forest seemed to exhale. The oppressive weight of fear lifted slightly, leaving the night eerily still. Daniel sank to his knees, chest burning, adrenaline fading. He had done it. He had faced the darkness and in doing so, freed the trapped souls. The first pale rays of dawn began to break through the mist, and Daniel realized that some things weren't meant to be understood, only faced. Tonight he had not just survived. He had sacrificed his comfort, his safety, everything he knew about fear, to save what remained of the innocent. And in the quiet aftermath, he felt it, a subtle, warm presence brushing past him, almost like a whisper of thanks. Daniel awoke to the sound of distant sirens and the faint murmur of voices. His eyelids were heavy, his body aching, and the acrid smell of smoke still clung to his clothes and hair. The forest, once suffocating and alive with whispers, was now eerily quiet, shrouded in a thin, cold mist that glimmered in the early morning light. He realized he was lying on the edge of the clearing, not far from where the cabin had burned to cinders. As he pushed himself to his feet, paramedics rushed toward him, their voices sharp and concerned. "Sir, can you hear me? Are you okay?" Daniel tried to answer, but his throat was raw, the words barely audible. One of them helped him to a sitting position, wrapping him in a thermal blanket. "The cabin, it's gone," Daniel croaked. Did anyone else?" "No one else," the paramedic replied. "We found nothing inside, just ash and debris. Are you sure you were alone?" Daniel's hand instinctively went to his chest, where his pulse still thudded erratically. I don't know," he admitted. "But there was a girl, and the children." The paramedic exchanged a glance with the sheriff, who had arrived moments later. "Sir, you're safe now. That's all that matters," the sheriff said, though his eyes betrayed doubt. He handed Daniel something small, a silver locket blackened at the edges but intact. Inside was a photograph of the girl from the road, Lydia, smiling faintly. Folded beneath the photo was a small note, the edges singed from the fire. "Thank you for setting us free." Daniel stared at it, disbelief warring with relief. He had faced something beyond comprehension, something alive only in fear and memory, and somehow he had survived. Somehow the lost souls of Hollow Creek were free. Weeks later, Daniel drove home from another late shift. The road was empty, the fog curling like fingers across the asphalt. He had thought the memory of that night would fade, but it clung to him like a second skin. He replayed it constantly, the whispers, the shadows, the eyes of the hollow man watching from the cabin. The radio played softly, the host narrating a true story about a man who braved Hollow Creek and freed the spirits trapped there. Daniel's lips curved in a faint, tired smile. It was surreal to hear the story broadcast as if the world had witnessed what he had alone. Then, in the rearview mirror, he saw something that made his chest tighten. At first he thought it was a trick of the fog. But there she was, a pale figure in white sitting quietly in the back seat. Her eyes met his, calm and grateful. A faint smile tugged at her lips, and then, as suddenly as she appeared, she faded, leaving only the empty seat and the lingering sense of warmth. Daniel whispered softly, almost to himself, "Rest easy, Lydia." The wind picked up, rustling the trees along the road. Leaves swirled across the pavement, carrying with them a faint sense of peace. The oppressive fear that had hung over Hollow Creek for decades seemed lifted, replaced by something quiet and watchful, like the forest itself was sighing in relief. For a moment, the world felt balanced again. Haunted, yes, but also free. Daniel realized that courage and compassion could reach even into the darkest corners, that a single act of bravery could undo years of pain and fear. As his truck disappeared into the morning mist, Daniel caught one last detail in the frost near the roadside. A single, small footprint, bare and delicate, glistening in the weak sunlight. And though it too eventually faded, he knew in his heart that Lydia and the other lost souls had finally found peace. The October wind whispered through the trees one last time, carrying a message across the quiet forest. The darkness may linger, but even in the coldest, loneliest nights there is hope, there is courage, and there is light for those willing to face the shadows, fade to black.